Oh, they turned that on unexpectedly. Hi, welcome to the video game debate. I am Dr. Rachel Cohert. I am a research psychologist. I have been studying games and those who play them for just over 10 years, with a focus on how games can impact our thoughts, our behaviors, and our psychological well-being. So today we are here to talk some science, so I'm so happy to see all of you here interested in talking about science and dispelling some long-held myths about how games can or cannot impact our behavior. So if you play games or if you've been around games, you know that these are the things that are typically discussed when we talk about how they can or cannot impact us. So that we have negative effects, addiction, aggression, violent crime. We also have some positive effects, learning, mental health. So we're gonna talk about as many of these as we can. If we don't get to them all, you can ask questions about these topics, any topics that come to your mind. We have a lovely panel of experts here from all different walks of science, and they will be more than happy to answer your question. So I'm going to give them a minute to introduce themselves before we get started.
Hello. It's nice when there's audience participation. I'm Dr. Stephen Daniel. I'm an assistant professor at Appalachian State University, which is in Boone, North Carolina, west part of the state in the mountains, where there's very little cell reception of any kind. So when we play online, I'm usually the one that...
Oh yeah, that's why you're banned.
Yeah.
He's making excuses now.
I do Can I keep going?
Please.
Is that okay? Okay. I do a lot of work with streamers. My main goal is to look at toxicity in chat rooms, what we call in our field hypernegativity. In addition to that, we're also looking into privacy issues, voyeurism, so forth. If you know anyone that is interested in talking about this, you do not have to have a major streaming channel. You can be a very small one, or if it is a big one, that's fine too. But we are holding focus groups at PAX East in Boston and PAX West in Seattle, and anywhere in between. So I'm advocating doing online ones as well. So this is kind of our research area. We're really interested in helping this community out, especially for those who are aspiring streamers, to make it a safer environment for them. So please contact me after this.
Please.
Shameless self-promotion.
Yeah.
That was a long thing going on there. I love you, man.
You're going to hear it again next panel.
I know, it's going to be great. I am Dr. Anthony Bean, and I am a clinical psychologist here in Texas. I am located in Fort Worth, and I specialize in geeks, gamers, and nerds, and all the fun stuff. Basically, with Rachel and I became friends a while ago, and we just kind of keep on going and doing fun stuff. And I wrote this fun book, A Clinician's Guide for working with video gamers from a non-addiction standpoint. And with that, I guess I'll turn it over to you.
Oh God, thank you. I'm Dr. Brian Kelly. I'm a psychologist in North Carolina. I'm also the co-founder of Geeks Like Us. It's a media company where we turn geeky passions into careers and provide academics and entertainment there. I use video games to help kids, especially kids on the spectrum, and have done research in that regard making those. And I guess as it's relevant to this, I'm in a North Carolina Recovery School addiction committee. So I do work a lot with kiddos who have substance use disorder or the related conditions.
Okay, well, everybody calls me Dr. B because I have a long Italian name that people think is more pretentious than my title, so we keep it simple. My full name's Rafael Michele Bocamazzo. Wow. So, yeah, our media person at Take This was like, no, go with Dr. B. Go with Dr. B. But I'm the clinical director of Take This. Who's heard of Take This? Oh, sweet, there's so many new people. Who knows what the AFK room is? Okay, great, go check it out. We created those, we run them all. It's in room 220. It's the most boring room at the show by design. It's confusingly quiet. But when I'm not working with Take This, I'm also a clinician in the Seattle area. I am a trainer for Applied Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing games, but I also co-own a clinic called Save Point Behavioral Health, because you can always return to the Save Point, with another geeky clinician. who is here with us today. Please, by all means, if you take pictures of this, take this org on Twitter and hashtag flat Sarah.
It's not derogatory. She's literally flat.
There's some fun posts from yesterday with Flat Sarah.
She could fall through cracks.
Okay, all right, I wasn't sure if you were done.
Neither am I.
Hi, everyone, this is my first PAX and first PAX panel. I'm Jess. I think I'm the only non-doctor as well, so no pressure on me.
Dr. Richard.
Yeah, I'm getting my PhD, but it'll be another couple years. But in addition to that, I also work full-time at the Bethesda Softworks User Research Lab in id Software right here in Texas.
All right, so before we get started, the AFK room is awesome. You should check it out. And Tony, I'm a little disappointed you didn't highlight the other book next to it.
That's because that's your job.
Okay, anyway, moving on. We're going to start with Dr. Daniel.
So, I will mention first and foremost that I am the lone communication person here, so when this was pitched to me to be a part of this panel, I knew that this would be my subject. Are online friends really your friends? And the answer is yes. Thanks, everybody. Really a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
He hit under his 6 minutes, guys. This is great.
Yeah, that was great.
He put it all in the introduction.
This stems a lot into two areas. First and foremost is, this is a real thing, the science of friendship. And there's a real thing within the science of friendship. But it also has to do with interpersonal communication. So this is kind of the area where you may have heard of a couple of these. First, my child is, I hear these a lot from parents, my child is spending more time playing games than spending time outdoors with their friends. So you may have heard that one before. My child needs better face-to-face communication and less time on the computer. Screen time will and maybe already has replaced face-to-face communication. And I'm worried about dangerous people and toxicity on online gaming. And a lot of these concerns are valid and true. And now some of you may be rolling your eyes with this, but there is a lot to be said here. First and foremost, though, is the area of face-to-face communication and how much we value it. So how much do we value face-to-face communication? A lot. In fact, we brought somebody here because she couldn't stand seeing herself online the entire time. So it means a lot to us. It's the gold standard. We have cliches that talk about face-to-face communication, such as, I can tell if you're lying if I can look you in the eye, which science has proven that's bogus. Lie detectors who are professionals at it fail 50% of the time. And there's an area within what's called displacement effects, which means when a new medium of communication is introduced, an old one dies. And so this is a lot of the fear. Not only when it comes to the modes of communication, so if it's interpersonal face-to-face, if it's talking on the phone, if it's Skype, if it's through asynchronous communication such as like Twitch chat or so forth, or on Reddit boards and so forth, that is often considered displacement. So when I'm on Reddit, now I'm losing a lot of that face-to-face communication. And people get scared. Just as when movies came out, just as when television, internet, gaming, addiction comes up. And we're going to talk about that, obviously. But that comes up. It's such a trigger word that we're so scared of this new medium that we're saying automatically, these people are addicted. But these are revolutions. They're new. We're still trying to figure them out. I mean, the internet is very brand new and still in this case. We're still learning a lot about it. And what's considered computer-mediated communication, which is what you think it is, it's your Skype, it's talking on Twitch chat, it's talking on Reddit, has a lot of bad negative connotations. And there's a lot of things to see why. It's hyper-negativity, as you've seen. In Twitch chats, good Lord, if you ever go on 4chan, it's some of the worst language and worst things you've ever read in your entire life. And you're like, I'm ashamed to be a human. This is awful. Things like stalking, catfishing. Again, this is new in the research field right now, is voyeurism, which I didn't even know about from a Twitch standpoint. Again, of people viewing you, and as the person who's producing content, you don't know that they're there. And they kind of like that anonymity. And that's really scary. And this is something that a lot of people have been talking about, privacy issues when we've talked to streamers. But there can also be a lot of benefits to CMC, again, computer-mediated communication. First and foremost is proximity and presence. I mean, we're from all over the place here. I consider us, well, I hope so, really good friends. But I met them all online. My co-authors that we wrote for the Psych of Zelda book, I still haven't met in person. But they're great editors. I met my lovely wife, who's with us this time, online. I mean, it's such an interesting way of where we're starting to dispel a lot of these rumors with it. And anonymity can actually be a really good thing. For all the bad posts we see, there's also a lot of positives as well. I can only speak anecdotally, and a lot of science is being produced from this. And I'm not saying give clinical advice online. But what I will say is I have seen on many message boards where somebody has said, I'm having a really hard time right now. I don't know what to do with my life. I don't know where I'm going, etc. And people who've never met each other step up. And otherwise they would feel really uncomfortable, even speaking to their friends, family, so forth. It's a real big problem, and this helps in terms of that. And what I find fascinating is disclosure is often quicker and more in-depth. So we talk a lot about what's called social penetration model. So when we talk about media and communication, we often say, how do you define friendship? Well, friendship is this communication over time that progressively gets deeper in terms of what we're talking about. That's how social penetration works. Now, it's like an onion, and I swear if I hear any Shrek jokes sliding into this, but you're peeling back layers of a person and who they are and what their identity is. Well, online it happens much quicker because sometimes that anonymity really helps, and I know I'm going to run out of time here. So the big thing I want to say is, what can we do from here? As gamers, as people who engage in communication with our friends from all over the world. First and foremost, communication integrates, not displaces. And what that means is when we get into integration, we're saying we use multiple. So we use our face-to-face. We use areas like gaming to help with some of that communication. And they're good, but the thing is, we've got to make sure we practice them a lot. I'm in communication. I have taught, I can't tell you how many sections of public speaking. And every single time I have students come up to me and say, I have no interest in doing this. None. I don't want to do this. And by the end of it, they're like, I'm kind of glad I did. I hated every minute of it, but it made me feel a lot better. And this is the point here, is within computer-mediated communication, we published a study to say, why aren't we doing that in classrooms? We're so focused on doing face-to-face communication and improving that we're not considering improving computer-mediated communication. Basically, how is your eye contact when you're talking to somebody on Skype, for instance? There's science behind that. What about asynchronous communication? So again, someone answers and you get that terrible ellipses that just looms in the corner and you get K. You know, it's like, who said the joke? Potassium to you too. But this is your chemistry joke for the day. So anyway, that's kind of my thing. The area is, yes, there is no real area of face-to-face versus CMC of, are your online friends really your friends? Yeah, they absolutely can be. The key area is how we improve our communication online, and that's my big story.
I think you bring up a really good point in that you see this question, and I think everyone in the room is like, well, obviously. But the fact that there is science behind it, there's science to support, not only do you disclose faster, like with the onion, but the friendships are just as long-lasting. They have just the same benefits. I mean, the only real difference is, you know, you can't hug your friend online, but I don't know, I hugged all of them today, and I found them today, so thank you.
I don't think I got a hug.
I'll get you a hug, don't worry.
That's probably better than doing a book.
Dr. Bean.
All right. So my topic is the aggression debate that's going on, which seems to be winding down in our literature, which is thank goodness. The idea behind it is where it came in, is that video games are imparting violence, and when people play them, they become violent and act violently towards others. This has been disproven time and time and time and time again finally gone all the way to Brown versus EMA. I even forget what year it was, but the Supreme Court struck it down, saying that the research around it was really shoddy and really poor, and that one of the main guys who spoke up for aggression causing variables actually peddled a lot of his own research, which has been disproven time and again. And but never mind, some of the people in the field are currently under not investigation, but watchful eyes about their research, because cherry picking their data at the moment to only show what they wanted to show, rather than looking at the entire encompassing factors. What our research does kind of say in this area is that there is a little bit of about a 5 to 10 minute aggression. Aggression does not equate to violence. Violence is an act versus aggression is a feeling. It all depends on kind of what we do. That after that 5 to 10 minutes, it's really gone. There's no other key points that come into play. There's nothing that can kind of happen. And again, aggression doesn't equate to the actual act of violence. Now, one of the studies that I know that I did, it actually showed, we did a logistical regression, showed that the pre-state of aggression before you actually play a video game actually determines how aggressive you're going to be after you play the video game. So it's not really the video game in a sense, it's already your pre-state. How aggressive are you as an individual? That kind of showcases what's kind of going on. Did I make enough time for you?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Quick question though. So why do you think that it lingers, this idea then that video games are violent? If the research is so poorly done, why does this idea still resonate everywhere?
So it bases itself off of the idea of moral panic. And the idea of moral panic is that something comes in new, very similar to how he was talking about it, and we see it time and time again. It was comic books, it was pinball in New York at one time, it was 10-cent dime magazines at another, rock music, movies at another time. Every time a new thing is introduced, there is just a fear of it. And with that fear, we claim that we've got to save the children are the future. And there's really nothing that's kind of going on. It's just a new development. And after video games, it's probably going to be VR. And after VR, it'll be something else. It's just going to keep on going this way. It's just more about looking at the research, knowing that correlation does not equate to causation. If a news article gets out there and says violence is equated to playing video games, go look at the study. I bet you anything it's correlational based and very poorly managed.
That's a good general piece of advice too. Always check the study.
Go look at it. Usually, if they are citing it online, you can find it for free online because the news people don't usually always have access to it. So, go
Dr.
look.
Bean, quick question. What is correlation?
I'm not going to do this one again.
Well, no, I'm actually serious because people like us talk about that all the time, but how many of you have taken a stats class? Holy crap!
Shot down.
Well, all right.
This is a really educated room.
Yeah. I just got stat slapped.
Yeah.
That was amazing. Okay.
Thank you all. We needed that.
We appreciate the effort,
Yes.
though.
It's got some cuss words. Is it okay? What do you thought? Of playing it? Is it okay? Okay. So I'm going to show you something real quick, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about addiction. But I think it's good to do now because Tony was talking a bit about kind of the moral panic, right? And that we've had those in the past for multiple things. And, again, you got to keep in mind, we all, before we were mental health professionals, we loved video games. Mm-hmm. And we lived it, and we experienced it. We saw all the good with it, and we saw some of the bad with it. So we're coming in when we see certain things, and we're not immediately demonizing games. But I want to give you this is a 15-year-old who, he's got a number of issues, and when screens were removed, here's kind of how he sounded. And I want you to imagine that you know nothing about video games, and you know nothing about how wonderful they can be, and you're a psychologist or somebody who comes up with a gaming disorder, and you see this or hear this.
Strong language.
Please, I'm really fucking bored. Just let me play. Even if you play with side and keyboards without a it's really not good at it. Please, I've played with you before. Just please, come on. Why? I just want to go.
Maxwell, can you please go to your room and collect yourself?
Oh my God! Stop saying that. Shut the fuck up.
Hold on there, man.
And there are some cuss words.
So it gets right. So the reason I say that is not to be shocking, but this is when people see this and then media grabs it, it's sensationalized. It already is sensational when you hear it. If you don't know the context, you're like, whoa, that kid has got some serious issues with gaming, is what you might assume, right? But I want to talk a little bit about addiction. So we've had a number of models of addiction. The very first was just, you have a devil in you, and exorcism, and quit being the devil, and you're a sinner. It's like, and now you're fixed.
In nome patri, nome filii, Spiritus
Be
Sancti.
gone now. Be gone now.
Yeah. So then it went to something we call the tolerance withdrawal model of addiction, where it is only if you introduce a chemical inside you and then you get dependent on it. The problem with that is then it suggests anything else that doesn't involve withdrawal is a will-based model of addiction, meaning you're just weak, right? You just can't stop. It's your fault. You're choosing to do it. And there was still some degree of sinning in it. We're talking kind of like early 1900s when that was a big one. Now I want to. Who here has heard of the rat park study? Okay, so I'll get a couple people. So here's the rat park study that I'll give you, and it's a very good, in my opinion, study on the most commonly used model now. So they had a number of rats, and we're terrible people. We mess with animals. That's what we do as psychologists, because we're monsters. And we would take these rats for a long time, up until about 1978, and we put them in these tiny little Skinner boxes where they're alone and they have nothing to do and no good food, no color, no exercise. And we would get them addicted to cocaine, morphine, heroin, all these types of drugs. And then we would give them a little lever that they could push and put it in their system, and they would keep pushing it to increasing degrees, even to the point where they might OD. Again, we're monsters. So all right. So this guy, he's Canadian, so take it at its worth. Rachel, I don't know, being a Canadian, is probably not as much credibility to what but here we go. So,
As the ambassador of Canada.
As the ambassador of
I
Canada.
moved there 4 months ago. I am not the ambassador.
She's Canadian.
Oh, sure. All right, so this guy in 1978, Bruce Alexander, he did a study where he says it doesn't seem to make sense to be trying to understand addiction by putting a rat in a cage by itself with nothing else. They saw that as a form of control. He saw it as 1,000 extraneous variables that would keep them addicted, right? So he created these little rat parks. He's also a monster. He got these rats addicted. It's really messed up when you see a drunk or high rat. You feel pretty bad about yourself, and then you write the study and move on with your life. But so he created this thing where some rats were in those type of Skinner boxes, and he got them all addicted to certain substances. Then he had a separate condition where they would go in a box and they'd have 16 to 20 other rats in there with them. They'd have mulch that had things under them, which is kind of as close to goal setting as you can have for a rat, where it's like, ooh, intermittent reinforcement with like some cheese. Some mazes, like exercise wheel. It was a nice environment, right? It was social, there was hobbies, there was color, it was supportive, there was good food, there was options. And when they were in there, they were no longer tied up to an IV, but they had 2 types of water they could choose. They could choose either regular water, just normal water, or they could choose some that had like a dopamine solution in it. And they tried different drugs. And what they saw is the rats who were in the rat park would eventually choose to go through withdrawal of those drugs because they recognized it was interfering with their place in the rat park. They couldn't play as much, they couldn't cuddle as much with the other rats, they couldn't get the cheese as much, so they're like, I don't want it. And so they would choose it that they're like these sick withdrawal rats and still do it. The ones who stayed in the Skinner box, still addicted. Switch those rats up, the ones who were in the rat park get addicted again. So the idea is, absolutely, substances are a problem. Substance use and dependence is very, very real. Withdrawal is very, very real. But what that suggests is, when we're looking at addiction, it is not just physical. In fact, it's arguably more psychological than anything as far as the effects of addiction. So that being said, we do have substance dependence. That's like heroin and things we'd expect. But we also have things we call processing addictions or behavioral addictions, which is certainly murky, because then you have to decide which ones do we say are addictive. Here would be my contention, and we all have thoughts on this. Morphine, heroin, cocaine, they're all naturally addictive. It's just a part of what they are. They're inherently addictive. Video games are very fun. And for people who are anxious or going through a tough time or struggle to socialize, sure, they can use it a lot to avoid that and to cope, and it can feel better. Video games is not an addictive substance. Video games is just a tool. It's an incredibly powerful one. We use it for therapy all the time. it's like nuclear fission. It can either make a hydrogen bomb or perpetual energy. So it decides, depends on what you do about it. But, in our community, again, we do have gaming disorder that'll be coming in the ICD from the World Health Organization. That's largely why we're even having this discussion. And so it's something we need to talk more and more about of where it sits.
Which we are actually all actively fighting on Twitter constantly.
And getting blocked.
And getting blocked.
Not
we,
me.
That's because you just sit back and watch and eat popcorn.
Yeah.
Wrong.
So he drinks his water suspiciously.
It's dopamine water. I'm having a great time here, guys.
With your friends around too.
Right.
But we are always actively fighting this type of thing. So one of the big things with research, every one study that comes out showing maybe a correlational study that the two variables are linked somehow without looking at everything else in the world, we have to put out about 10 studies to counteract that one. So it's very easy for someone to just put out a bunch of studies that are really terribly created, and then we have to work our butts off to go and try to be like, no, this is not accurate, let's replicate the study and include more variables and show that it actually has a 0.4% valence reliability, and doesn't really do anything. I'm using mixing words now, so continue.
Yeah.
Fleur.
The problem is the one sensationalist headline goes everywhere, and then the 10 boring studies that are like, but go nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
No. Sarah, do you agree? Yeah.
Oh,
Good.
wait.
Sarah looks like she's totally
Watch
agrees.
your
That's-
God, we need to have another
And that's,
HR
and that's
meeting.
media priming.
I'm gonna
that's-
apologize for Sarah. That was so rude, and anybody who's offended.
Sorry.
Sorry, we're sorry about that.
It's good she doesn't have a mic.
No, I'm
Yeah.
Stephen.
No, it's just real quick of just negative messages in terms of what resonates. It goes back to the servers of people who work in restaurants of, one scathing review can erase 10. Well, it works the same in media as well in terms of what studies. And they replicate on each other because they reference those same bad stories. We do a lot of this work with in shooting coverage. So the shooting coverage comes up
Bless you.
quite a lot. Bless you.
Very good.
You're welcome.
All right, Jess.
Great, thanks. Just to clarify to the audience, I think when I introduced myself, I didn't have a chance to mention that my background is not clinical psychology. It's also more of a media arts and communications focus, so you're not the only communications person on the panel. So representation in games, I feel like, this is a pretty hot topic recently. It's been kind of controversial in terms of depictions of certain characters in video games over the years, and even recently with Gamergate, which of course happened a couple years ago, we've seen a lot of misogyny manifest in games and gamer culture more broadly. I think as gamers, we all see what a lot of characters look like. You don't really need a research study to kind of support or back up the evidence that's out there. But a lot of the research, the publications that are out there do generally support the notion that we have, a lot of minorities that aren't represented, or when they are presented, it's often in stereotypes, and there tends to be, an over-representation of men and Caucasians in video games. And kind of like, it's sometimes dismissed as like, well, it's just catering to the audience, the predominant audience, or it's just a character, it doesn't really matter. But a lot of the published research that's out there shows that players are more likely to feel immersed in a game when they have a character that they can identify with and that they see represents them in some way, in some facet. And they're more likely to enjoy the game as well. So overall, we see when players are presented with choice in terms of the characterizations they can embody in games, it does seem to have improvements to the overall player experience. But that said, like, this is a very a topic, like when we're talking about sexist depictions in games and sexism in games culture. Like, do games cause sexism, for instance? This is another area where there can sometimes be a bit of an academic agenda. And so, part of this panel is of course to present sides that are like dispassionate and evidence-based and objective. But just like in the violence research, there are some people who have sort of, scholars, people who do publish in this field. There can be like a publication bias that emerges. So like some of the research with having women or men play like as a sexualized, attractive female character and how that ties into their player experience and perception of themselves following gameplay. Often those studies are published when they find like negative effects on players. And often these are, studies with limitations, such as like maybe that person is actually not really a gamer. They're an average college student who happens to be taking a media class or a psychology class, and they're just kind of rolled into an experimental study for extra credit. And maybe it's the first time they're playing like an open world MMO, and they're randomly assorted into an experimental condition where they're playing as like a highly sexualized, highly objectified character. And that's probably going to impact them in some way, especially if they're not used to seeing those kind of characterizations or used to playing video games. That may be something that makes a strong impression on them that comes out as statistically significant in the statistical findings of the study. And just like with the violence debate, in games, when certain studies find like negative effects on players, whether it's violence or sexism or some other like facet, if it happens to find like a negative effect, it is usually more likely to get published. I'm sorry. So that's kind of like, I guess, the general takeaway on it. The research is pretty muddled with the sexist depictions. Like, a lot of the samples aren't necessarily like, people who would identify as a gamer. Often it's, surveys with college students or, maybe not necessarily people identifying as gamers. On the flip side, there is some research where there are women who enjoy playing as sexualized characters. Like, women gamers have actually expressed this in some interviews that's been published. But just like any, whether it's a film character or a game character or a comic character, one could also argue that we like characters with depth. Like, we shouldn't necessarily sexualize them just for the sake of having them be sexy, whether it's a male or a female. I think that's pretty fair to say. And so, what people like to do, I guess my advice would be to, have characters who are multifaceted and not necessarily like sexualized for the sake of having a sexy representation.
So no, just breastplates to block those arrows.
Yeah.
A little more than breastplates. Mm-hmm. Okay, gotcha. Metal bikinis.
I think you bring up a theme we're seeing here about how it's never all black and white, and with these debates, it's always like, games make you so violent, games teach you everything, games are addictive.
That research makes me violent.
It's true. And I think it was
really does.
Carl Sagan who said that science thrives on error, which kind of gets into that black and white debate, because science is muddled. It's gray. It's always gray, and it's going to continue to be gray because we're going to keep publishing, and then somebody's going to find something different, and then we're going to just keep arguing until, well, that's that.
I mean, it is always gray, but it's also, we've been at it, game studies as a science, 30 years. I mean, we have some consensus, but the fact that it is sensationalized and it's a moral panic, I feel like it gives the impression that we don't have any answers, but yet we do have some.
That's true.
They're linked to short-term aggression, they're not linked to violence, they can teach us lots of cool things. I mean, we do have some concrete findings. Thank God, after 30 years, we better, I would hope. All right, Dr. B, our special guest.
I'm special.
There we are.
No, I just watch The Simpsons way too much. Still. So yeah, let's talk about gamers with ADHD and autism. Any of you heard any parent, any teacher say, they can't pay attention in my class, why can they focus on games for 12 hours? Raise your hand. Why? How can they do that?
I'm a teacher.
Okay. Oh man, okay, I know where I'm looking when I'm talking. You just volunteered.
Big eye contact.
Okay. Well, so and with autism too. So one of the I'm going to speak to this from both sides, because one of the things as part of Take This's mission of destigmatizing mental health, I'm very open about the fact that I have autism, and I just mask it really well most of the time. But the reality is, to think about how this works for people with autism, which processing speed challenges, cognitive difficulties in attention and concentration, that sort of thing, are considered so common in autism that technically you're really not supposed to diagnose ADHD and autism separately in most cases. So this applies to both. My brain is under firing. If you've ever worked on a car, you know that the crankshaft has to rotate at a certain speed in order to make the car go forward. My brain isn't firing at the same speed as most people, which is why I have a hard time keeping up. And it's why when you give me caffeine or other stimulants and my brain starts working at the speed the rest of your brains work at,
Or alcohol.
That just makes him think he's doing really well.
I am so hilarious when you've been drinking.
Right.
That was layered.
That was an onion, right?
Right, there was an onion. But no, so basically the brain fires faster and outwardly we slow down. But we crave stimulation. And when you think of a video game, it's not that you're doing one task for 12 hours. How often do you get a new task in a video game? 5 minutes, that's conservative. I'm like, doesn't it, forgive me, I actually don't play multiplayer games or first-person shooters. How long does a match in Overwatch last? 5 minutes? 6 minutes, okay. So yeah, you're getting something brand new every 5 minutes. So this is constantly novel. This is constantly new. And games are real, there's a lot of research that's gone into games about how to make them engaging and stimulating. And so it's not that people with ADHD and autism, that they can focus on one thing, like video games for 12 hours. It's that there's a gajillion things that they're focusing on for 12 hours, and it's happening so quickly. But the other thing, and this speaks a lot to autism. So we're going to be doing a panel, actually a couple of us are going to be doing a panel tomorrow on the realities of autism, media representation, and what's the myth, what's the fact. But one of the things that I will tell you living with autism, at least my particular version of it, is ambiguity sucks. Confusion is one of the worst emotions, and 95%, you know that feeling you get when you're like, oh, did I do something wrong socially and I can't tell? That's what it's like for me 95% of the time, and it's exhausting. Video games and games in general have rules. They have concrete rules. If I press B at a certain time, the ice climber will swing the hammer and Kirby goes bye-bye. If I hit A and down, there's rules to this. And there's even ways of controlling how you appear online. I get more control over my appearance in, multiplayer games if I play them. I don't have time. I get to control when I respond to people, and for those of us with processing challenges, asynchronous communication like that, where I get time to process, think about it, and then respond, is actually really advantageous. I sound like I graduated from clown college a lot of the time speaking, but I'm eloquent on paper because I have time to process.
He's also good with an accordion, I hear.
No.
He keeps talking about a nose flute. He keeps saying he's good at a nose flute, and none of us know what a nose flute is.
It's a real thing.
It sounds sexual.
It's a real
I don't
thing.
understand.
It's like you basically turn your entire face into a whistle. It covers your nose and your mouth. And, no, it's ridiculous.
That's just really weird.
This is like Mad Max stuff going on.
No, it's
weird
ridiculous.
breathing.
So
Thunderdome.
with games and online presence, it can be really appealing to those of us who struggle with social cues. because there are more definitive rules and there's frameworks to games. And so that can be an attraction as well. And so for a lot of the kids I work with, and a lot of the kids, you know, I assume the rest of you work with, that's a lot of the things we see. I mean, I know, Ryan, you work with a lot of autism, and you get, you know, a lot of the kids we have, they get a sense of mastery in online spaces that they don't have in social, you know, IRL social interactions where they're asking, am I doing it right all the time? Well, they know on screen. I used to do metal sculpture. It took me a week to do something small. I can create a house in Minecraft in like an hour. That feels amazing. Until the creeper blew it up in front of that parent training I was doing. Oh, so sad. It was so sad.
Always the creeper.
They asked me, the parents were asking, what's that green thing going towards your house? I'm like, what? And then, and then I looked sad. And I'm like, you okay? That's 2 hours of repair work I'm gonna have to do. But you get to have a sense of mastery, predictability, and rapid stimulation playing video games. And that is something that appeals to, well, a lot of people, but it's like candy to a lot of folks with autism and ADHD. And that's what I think some of us end up leveraging and using games for, to try and externalize it to the real world. That's part of the reason that I used you know, Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing games for that, to have that framework to teach skills that we can then generalize outside of it, to basically use these games and use my clients' interests for good. And also I get to talk video games with my clients, it's great. They're so jealous I'm here right now, again.
I think what Raph is also saying is that the mechanics within the video games can be extrapolated outside if you know what
If you know what you're doing.
If you know what you're doing, you know what each of the games can do, you can take those same factors, place it on the client's life, such as kind of what we do, and we see kids with autism that we work with start to flourish in those other areas and stop the excessive video game play if they're having those difficulties and social interaction goes up. Those are the types of things that we do.
Yep. And for full transparency, since I was the guy who talked about addiction, there are times where, not like cocaine or anything, but where we do have to remove screens for a little bit. It's just a part of intervention. That kiddo, we had to remove it for a while. The problem wasn't the video games. The problem was he had a number of, alcoholic father, generalized anxiety, he was school refusal for weeks. There was a lot, right? A lot of that psychological. Sometimes we do need to move it briefly because, as Ralph said, if you're getting everything in life from a game, you're getting your sense of mastery, your friends, the entertainment, avoidance of things that are aversive and frustrating, feeling happy, getting up. Yeah, it's very enticing and you might stick with it. So there are times, if you have kids or, actually out of curiosity, raise your hand if you have a kid. Pretty good, yeah. So with your kids, let them play video games. It's awesome, it's great, but yeah.
I don't think you're gonna have to sell that to this crowd.
But regulating to some degree is important, right? Use it like leverage, use it proactively as a way to help them grow.
It's called the Premack principle. Look it up. Great Wikipedia article on it. Very simple.
We potty train on Game Boy games.
Yeah.
All right, so we only have a few more minutes. I want to leave you with a few places to go for more information on this topic. The first are, if you're book people, I'm such a book person, there's the video game debate, hence the name of the panel. That's the science book. If you want to know the studies, know the numbers, know exactly what they're doing when they look at violence and aggression, that is the book for you. The middle one is the Cliff's Notes version that I wrote for parents who have no time, like me. So if you just want, what does it do, tell me briefly, the middle one is for you. Tony already gave a plug, so I'm skipping his now. No. Tony,
I'm here
for
3 more panels, I'll get it in somewhere.
No. Yes, I can. Do you want to give a little plug for your book?
Are those books available here?
The
Two of
Parents
them
Guide
are.
to Video Games and the Video Games in Therapy are available here, yes.
And just as a matter of endorsement, I actually knew about Dr. Cowart's books before I met her, and I consider these 2 books to be, actually now all 3 of them, to be absolutely essential books that I make some of the parents I work with read. Especially the middle one. She did not pay me to say that, but they are just really, really well done.
It's true. I run a nonprofit up in Fort Worth with 13 different clinicians underneath me, and we kind of even loan out the books just so they can get review of it in there and assign certain chapters so parents can be more knowledgeable. The more knowledgeable you are of the subject, the less fear there is of it creating the moral panic.
If you are not a book person, we have Take This. I love Take This. It's amazing. Go to the website, go to the AFK room. I was already there. It's amazing. Second, games researchers on Twitter. If you are Twitter freaks like we all are, there is a list I have. Crowdsourced it on my website. There's about 200 of us in that list. So if you want to learn more and just get your daily dose, now tweets are longer, long dose of what's happening in the game studies world. You can find us there. And then there's also a podcast. Jamie Madigan, Dr. Jamie Madigan's not here with us. He was with us in West. He does a great podcast. It's accessible to everyone. He does like one a month. I think the recent one was on Dungeons and Dragons, so it's not just about digital games. But
His research is excellent.
Yeah,
It's
right
So
on
it's
par.
so stellar.
Yes.
it's very good. So we don't have time for questions, but all of us love to talk.
Yeah.
So if you see us anywhere, if you see us having margaritas, whatever, come and find us. We'll be happy to talk to you all.
All right,
Thank you.
but before you go, can you do me a quick favor? My wife's been calling and texting this whole time, wondering how it's going. In a minute, can I film you guys, and you guys just boo? And just, like, if I can get some, like, you suck! Like, just, okay?
If you met his
We
wife,
didn't
you'd
get an
understand.
applause yet, so.
No, we're not gonna give. No, we're not getting applause after that. Just give us the worst. Just your worst. Just
You suck!
You can see us all again at 5 in the Zelda panel. Yeah?
It'll be at the Falcon Theater.
All right, thank you.
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
That's another one.
It's here still.
Just watch it.
Quiet.
I'm glad you're all alive.